It happened back in October of 22 to dot. I was living by myself in a small home, situated within a neighborhood typical of family homes. I had been residing there since 2015 and personally witnessed the decline of Halloween celebrations in the area following 2020. Essentially, after 2020, no one seemed to observe the holiday anymore. None of the houses really put up any decorations, and it appeared no children were interested in dressing up or going door to door for candy. This was quite a shift, as up until then, trick-or-treating had always been a significant annual event that everyone participated in. For the last couple of years, my neighborhood had been completely quiet and empty on Halloween night. Consequently, I genuinely assumed this particular year would be no different. On the morning of Halloween, I brewed some coffee and went out onto the front porch to enjoy the sight of the fall-colored trees. However, the moment I opened the door, I noticed two individuals standing in my front yard, perhaps 30 feet away, positioned near the trees. I referred to them as kids, but I couldn't be entirely certain. My assumption was based solely on them wearing Halloween masks. They seemed to be on the taller side and quite thin, most likely high schoolers, if not adults. They were too far away for me to get a clear look at their features. Essentially, the instant I opened the door, both of them froze for a brief moment, then hastily walked deeper into the trees and away from my house. Their quick departure looked highly suspicious. It couldn't have seemed more questionable the way they scurried off. It was precisely the reaction you'd expect if you caught someone doing something they shouldn't be. Moreover, even though it was Halloween, I'd never witnessed anyone simply wandering around in masks that early in the day. Honestly, I figured it was likely just some kids acting foolish. I mean, with the holiday and everything. At least they walked away once they saw me, so I didn't feel an immediate need to be concerned. I stayed outside, enjoying the pleasant fall weather with my morning coffee. The remainder of that day was pretty much the same as any other, progressing normally until about 4 p.m. This was roughly when trick-or-treaters would typically start appearing. Although, as I mentioned, I hadn't seen any in years. Still, for reasons I'm not entirely sure of, I'd grabbed a small bag of candy and had it ready, just in case a few children did happen to come by. I suppose it was simply clinging to the tradition, holding on to the old ways. I settled onto the sofa in the living room and turned on the television, searching for a channel airing the usual Halloween shows and movies. I also left the curtains by the front windows open so I could observe outside if anyone was walking around. Over the next couple of hours, I saw nothing more than a few cars passing down the street. No children or anyone else walking about. Eventually, the sun set and the entire street fell into darkness, feeling lifeless, even after all these years. Seeing that scene on Halloween still felt strange. I remained in the living room, continuing to watch TV. Around 8 p.m., however, a knock sounded at the front door. This made me jump up from the couch. I didn't see anyone outside the windows approaching the house, and even if it had been just a couple of trick-or-treaters, I thought it was a bit late for anyone to still be out. I brought the bowl of candy over anyway and opened the door. A small shiver ran through me when I saw it was the same two individuals I'd encountered earlier. Again, they had masks on and were dressed entirely in black, leading me to guess they were kids. But up close, they were definitely taller than what one would typically expect from anyone still trick-or-treating, and I quickly noticed they didn't even have bags or anything with them to collect candy. The two of them just stood there. I couldn't even make out their eyes through the masks. This made the situation feel truly strange. I still tried to offer a smile and asked if they wanted candy, holding out the bowl. Neither of them spoke. After just a few seconds of waiting, I simply closed the door, feeling completely weirded out. But even after this second encounter with them, I still rationalized that this was just some silly Halloween prank they were pulling on me, likely trying to scare me just for kicks. I waited a minute, then looked out the door again, and the two were gone. For some reason, this confirmed in my mind that it was just some stupid prank and not something I needed to overthink. I went back to the couch and continued watching TV well into the night. I don't think I got up until 1 or 2 in the morning to go to bed. I turned everything off and went upstairs. By this point, I hadn't given those two individuals a thought in hours. I got into bed and felt myself drifting off to sleep almost immediately, but was suddenly jolted awake by a knock echoing through the house. I quickly got up and opened my bedroom door. They knocked again, right at the front door, the sound resonating through all the quiet rooms and hallways of my home. I quietly walked downstairs, trying to see who was there. I was genuinely terrified, even though I was certain it was the same kids, because at this point it felt like much more than just some harmless prank. This was outright stalking or harassment. At the very least, I went up to the door and looked out. Only one of them was there. He stood there, mask covering his face, right up near the door, still knocking repeatedly. But it was just him, and that somehow freaked me out even more. Where was the other one? I backed away from the door, trying to gather my thoughts. And then I heard a soft creak behind me, a door swinging open in the hallway. I turned my body. There was a shadowy figure at the end of the hall, and the instant I looked at him, he started rushing toward me. Holding a knife, I sprinted up the stairs and into my bedroom, locking the door and shoving anything I could find in front of it. I started calling the police while trying to figure out my next move. Outside the door, I could hear the muffled sound of the two men talking back and forth. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I think they were also debating what to do. And after about 30 seconds, their footsteps retreated back downstairs and out of the house. A few officers came over and conducted an investigation, but they didn't find much to go on. We all agreed, though, that one of them knocking at the front door was likely a distraction so the other could find a way inside. And surprise me, why they targeted me remains the biggest mystery, though. And it still leaves me terrified. A lot of people I've spoken to believe it was a couple of disturbed teenagers, or perhaps young adults who had some sinister plan in mind for Halloween night. That would explain why all of this happened to me for seemingly no reason, but I don't think I'll ever know the truth for certain. Story 2 by Jonathan F. *. Behind my neighborhood lies a reasonably large forest, complete with numerous trails suitable for hiking and camping. I frequented many of these trails, but often discovered I enjoyed the experience far more when I was completely alone. I deliberately avoided all the main campgrounds, preferring to set up my tent for camping along some of the less traveled backpacking trails. I undertook this particular camping trip sometime near the end of autumn. I remember all the trees were bare, and the weather was growing colder with each passing day. I figured I'd be okay for at least 1 or 2 more trips before winter officially set in. I began my hike around midday. There were no cars or people anywhere near the trailhead, and throughout the 8-mile hike, I didn't encounter a single person. I assumed most people had probably finished their hiking and camping for the season. It was significantly colder than I had anticipated, but I was prepared with heavy jackets and a sleeping bag rated for -20, which was more than adequate for my needs. Eventually, I came upon an open spot that seemed like a perfect place to set up camp for the night. It was just a short distance off the main trail, and I was fairly certain I'd actually camped there once or twice before, so I felt comfortable as I pitched my tent, built a small fire ring, and got a campfire going. I prepared a hot cup of decaf coffee to help warm up as I sat right next to the fire. As the sun began to set, the temperature dropped steadily. There was also a slight breeze, blowing cold air in my face, making the experience more uncomfortable than I had hoped for. And there was something else. I kept noticing something in the distance, way out in the trees. It was far enough away that it blended in with the surroundings, among all the dry branches and bushes. So, I couldn't identify what it was, but it felt as though whoever or whatever it was remained perfectly out of sight, just far enough away that I couldn't see them clearly. Only their movement between the trees was visible. And as the sun continued its descent, this only made me feel increasingly uneasy. The idea that I was being stalked started to creep into my mind, but I tried to dismiss it. I didn't want to even consider that possibility. I really hoped it wasn't a person at all and was just a deer or some other harmless animal wandering through its territory. About an hour after sundown, with the night fully overhead, the uneasy feeling combined with the chilling wind made me quite uncomfortable. I thought perhaps addressing one of those issues might help. So, I moved into the tent and got into my sleeping bag to warm up. I left the entrance unzipped with the flap tied to the top so I could still feel some warmth from the campfire, and watched the flames while lying inside. This definitely helped me stay warm, but only being able to see what was directly in front of me wasn't ideal. Furthermore, beyond maybe 10 feet from the campfire, it was just absolute darkness. I should also mention that I'd been camping for years, so this feeling of solitude in the woods at night wasn't unfamiliar. And yet, this was the only time I'd ever felt this specific way. Everyone always advises that if you get a bad feeling or sense something is off, you should just pack up and leave without hesitation. I was naive enough to believe I'd never experienced that feeling. And even worse, I was foolish not to listen to it if I had. I stayed in the tent, curled up in my sleeping bag, watching the fire. A good 2 or 3 hours passed. Nothing really changed except it got colder. But as I lay there, I started to hear what sounded like footsteps crunching through the woods behind me. It was coming from behind my tent, the one area I couldn't see at all. I wanted to get up and look, but I found myself frozen. Panic began to set in as I tried to rationalize every possible way that what I was hearing wasn't what it seemed. The footsteps crept closer and closer, getting perhaps 5 to 10 feet away from the back of the tent before it abruptly went silent. The crunching stopped, and the sounds of the campfire and the wind blowing through the woods filled the sudden quiet dot. My heart was pounding violently in my chest. Embarrassingly, I think I remained frozen in place for a full minute before the sheer terror of knowing someone was right behind my tent became too much to bear. In one swift motion, I unzipped my sleeping bag, grabbed my flashlight, and jumped out of the tent, shining the light directly into the woods behind me. No one was there. Somehow, this actually made me panic even more. I hadn't heard any footsteps walking away, so honestly, a part of me thought I might be losing my mind. I must have stood there, swiveling around and sweeping the flashlight in every direction for 15 minutes. listening intently to every sound the woods made and feeling completely unsure of what to do next. Should I pack up and try to navigate out of the forest in the dark, or should I stay put at the campsite and just keep watch? I was freezing though, and the fire was running low on fuel. After a while, I decided to start packing up. I wasn't sure yet if I'd actually leave or stay put at the campsite, but packing seemed like a sensible action either way. As soon as I began taking down my tent, a flurry of footsteps sounded from the dark area just behind it. I thought I might have caught a glimpse of something running away, too, but with the flickering campfire casting shadows everywhere, I couldn't be certain. I quickly finished packing, stopping every few seconds to scan my surroundings. I was completely on edge. After a few minutes, I managed to get everything stowed in my bag. I slung it over my shoulders, and before I could properly extinguish the fire, a man appeared across from me. He walked up quickly, approaching the light. He was tall and larger in build, wearing torn jeans, a dirty fleece jacket, and a black beanie. He looked to be around 40 and had a distant, heavy look in his eyes. Leaving so late was risky. The cold night air made running blindly into the dark seem far too dangerous. He spoke in a grating, firm voice. I didn't even answer, taking a few steps back. The man looked as if he was trying to figure out how to keep me there. But once I started moving further away, I could see in his expression that he realized he wasn't in control. His eyes widened into an unsettling stare. I turned and simply started running straight into the trees. I could barely see where I was going, but I could hear the man's footsteps right behind me. After about 30 seconds though, I guess I'd either put too much distance between us for him to follow or he simply stopped chasing. I kept running for another 15 minutes, just to be safe and put as much distance as possible between us. But then I was lost. It was pitch black, and there was no way for me to know which direction would lead me back to the trail. And even if I went the right way, I probably wouldn't be able to see the trail in the dark. So I sat down against a tree in the middle of the darkness and just waited. Hours passed as I sat there, shivering. The entire forest was silent and still pitch black. I swear, though a couple of times I heard something moving in the distance out in the trees, like the guy was still walking around looking for me. I just remained quiet and waited for the sun to rise, hoping it would allow me to see where I was and find my way back. I managed to get out unharmed, which I honestly think is a miracle. I think that guy had some truly malicious intentions that I barely escaped from. He'd likely been stalking me all night, waiting for a moment to act. Why it all happened the way it did, I don't know. Story 3, by Anonymous last fall. My sister went on a trip during the Halloween weekend. It was for some kind of party she was attending, but since she was flying there, bringing her dog, Milo, wasn't very convenient. She would only be gone for a couple of days though, and I offered to look after Milo while she was away. The apartment I lived in didn't permit pets, so instead of bringing Milo to my place, I simply stayed at her house for the weekend. I packed my work laptop and some miscellaneous items I might need, then drove the 30 minutes down to her house that morning. Roughly an hour after arriving, my sister left for her trip. Now Milo was a really easy dog to care for. I'd done this many times before. He was incredibly sweet and wasn't particularly noisy, despite being a German Shepherd. He was getting older, so most of the time he just hung out in whatever room I was in and relaxed while I worked. So I set my laptop up in one of the spare bedrooms and started my workday. Milo lay in his dog bed right next to my desk, just out of my direct line of sight. Aside from me working, there wasn't much happening for several hours. But curiously, throughout the day, he kept lifting his head. Normally, I'd just assume it was a typical dog behavior, reacting to some small, insignificant sound. But this felt different. He seemed genuinely sure he'd heard something because he wouldn't simply go back to sleep. Milo's head would lift, his ears would perk up, and he'd stare at the doorway for a full 5 to 10 minutes. This happened often enough for me to get up at one point and check around the house. Milo followed me as I did. He stayed right by my side, focused as if he was also searching for something. I never found or saw anything, but it definitely gave me a strange feeling. I believe I finished working around 5 or 6. Since it was fall, we had about an hour before it got dark and cold. So I attached Milo to his leash and took him out behind the house for a walk. My sister was fortunate with this property. It had a preserved forest trail right behind it. But at that time of year, all the trees along the path had already lost their leaves and looked mostly dead. This actually made the area feel a bit spooky, especially since it was later in the afternoon. It was also very quiet out there. Just me and Milo walking, the sound of us crunching through the dry leaves on the trail. I knew the trail was about a 20-minute loop, and we had gone down roughly halfway when suddenly Milo stopped, just completely freezing in place. I looked at him, asked if he was okay, and tugged on the leash, but he wouldn't budge. He wouldn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on something ahead of me. I turned and looked down the trail, but I didn't see anything. I looked back down at Milo, petted him, then gently tugged the leash forward again. But he still wouldn't move, and his gaze remained fixed on something down at the end of the trail, further into the forest. So I simply turned and began heading back. Milo immediately followed. For the rest of the walk back to the house, he kept looking back, but never once stopped to sniff or investigate. He just kept his tail down and walked alongside me all the way back to the house. Seeing him so nervous made me feel really uneasy, though I wasn't sure if my nervousness was about him or about whatever he was so scared of. I eventually called my sister and talked to her for a bit after getting back inside, asking if she might know why he was acting this way, but she had no idea. Even during that phone call, Milo stayed close to my side. This made me feel unsettled or uneasy, as if he was aware of something I wasn't. I started walking around the house again, thinking about it, and looked out several windows. But it wasn't until I got back upstairs to the spare bedroom that I looked out that window and saw something peculiar. It was just for a fleeting moment, but I thought I saw someone outside near the house. Someone walking from left to right, vanishing past the edge of the window before I could get a clear look. It was almost like one of those peripheral vision things where you think you know what you saw, but when you look directly, you realize it was nothing. So, I couldn't say for sure whether what I saw was real or just my mind playing tricks because I was so on edge. I stayed up in that room, sitting at the desk and trying to relax for the rest of the night. I watched some videos on my laptop and kept an eye on Milo. He stayed quiet, lying near me and seeming exhausted from the day. For the next couple of hours or so that we were up there, nothing much happened. Milo eventually passed out, and I was just watching YouTube and trying to unwind. Even with all the strangeness that had occurred, I managed to sort of mentally distance myself from it. Not that I completely forgot about it, but perhaps I just convinced myself it wasn't anything serious. When it got late, I started getting ready for bed and brought Milo downstairs to let him outside one final time. I opened the back door and turned on the lights. Milo was hesitant, but he still went out, as he took care of his business. I looked around. The woods surrounding the house were quiet and felt eerie. I watched Milo walk toward the trees, then stop and turn, not facing me, but staring at something on the side of the house. I peered around the doorway and looked. Within seconds, all I saw was a man charging toward me. I jumped back, and Milo immediately started sprinting at him. The man looked horrified for a split second, stopping dead and trying to dodge the dog. I thought Milo was actually about to attack the man for a moment, but at the very last second, he backed off and started barking and growling, responding to my commands and running back inside. I quickly closed and locked the door, and before I could see anything else, the man was gone, just like that, in the space of a few seconds. Everything was quiet again. I quickly dialed 911 to be completely honest, though the police were no help at all. They shone their lights around, but that was about the extent of their assistance. However, as we were discussing what had happened, I was fiddling with the back door and discovered that the lock on it actually didn't work. The lever would click as if it were locking, but the door would still open. My sister confirmed that it had never been like that before. That night, I took Milo to a hotel, and we spent the next day there. Based on Milo's behavior, I believe the man was likely watching us all day and possibly even following us in the woods during our walk. There's also a possibility he had been inside the house before, maybe even earlier that day while I was working. I keep reflecting on how Milo was constantly looking at the doorway, and the fact that the back door lock wasn't working seems like more than just a coincidence. But Milo definitely startled him enough to get us both inside, safely, and scare him away. I'm actually quite surprised, though, because my sister hasn't experienced anything weird or had any further encounters since then. It almost makes me think that the man wasn't there for her. Perhaps he'd been watching me for longer than I realized and found out I'd be alone at a house in the woods, rather than back in my apartment building with other people around. He might have thought it was his best chance to do whatever he was trying to do. Probably something terrible. I can't say for sure, but I've been on edge ever since.